during the last few decades of animism has escaped the attention of scholars of comparative religion. Animism, however, still represents a very important concept in both the world view and shamanism of northern Siberian peoples. In this paper, different types of the concept of the soul, and this freestyle, different concepts of the soul will be enumerated, and animistic nations of Siberian shamanism will be presented against the background. Special attention will be paid to the different types of shamanic spiritual helpers and leaders or spiritual rapper. A few decades ago, it was generally held that shamanism in Siberian had ceased to exist and belonged among the worthless ideological memories of the past. The opinion prevailed both in the communist Soviet Union, which still existed at that time, as well in other parts of the world in the Western capitalist countries in the mid-20th century, and even in the 60s and the 70s. Both ideological systems still lived in the fever of development. The most important ideal in those decades was that of the modern world that could be created through development. The concept of modern has been one of the most frequently repeated keywords of the 20th century, and consequently had almost magical power. It was imbued with positive content, in part because it was associated with development, mainly technical development, and in part because it was met rejection of the tradition of earlier periods, the repudiation, denial of, and destruction of tradition of all kinds. The 20th century has often been called the age of revolutions and the revolutionary age, but this label hid what was one of the very characteristic features of the process. Modernity was always accompanied by a destruction. In most cases, transformation meant the destruction of the earlier structures. Parallel with the technical development, the social structures changed, especially in those cases where the transformation was urged and even directed by political and ideological forces. It was perhaps folk culture that was most strongly affected by these changes in the eyes of militants of modernity. Cultural traditions were the most hated enemy, but this was especially true in Siberia, where the archaic beliefs and mythology of a heroic epic and narrative tradition preserved the identity of the ethnic minorities. This meant that shamanism was among the elements of a traditional culture to be eradicated. In short, the transformation that was carried out in the name of modernity and so-called development was directed against tradition. However successful this ideology of modernity may have appeared for decades, by the late 70s and even more in the 80s. In the 90s, its shortcomings, failure, and unavoidable revision became obvious. It was found that the forced industrial development had not only brought unquestionable achievements and created a certain degree of prosperity, it had also caused enormous environmental pollution, the disruption of a traditional local communities, and the rejection of cultural traditions, religions, and rights, resulted in moral uncertainty and in the rising crime rates. As a reaction, a return to traditions can be quite clearly observed in the postmodern age. This is especially true in the post-communist Russia, among the small ethnic groups in the area of today's Siberia. A quarter of a century after the studies in shamanism in Siberia were written, the emergence of a trend that could be called postmodern shamanism cannot be seen. The author of this article had opportunity to observe a number of forms of the post-traditional shamanism. Anti-deception, XBL, doceantism, hypnotism of religion, and the following the main types of Eurasian shamanism today are presented on the basis of experiences gained in the field. Naturally, the typology is not final. It is in need of expansion and refinement, but for the time being, it can be regarded as a good representation of the phenomena. This is a need for such a typology because most of the colleagues deal with the old shamanism but neglect the phenomena of today's postmodern shamanism. Two main classes of shamanism can be distinguished. Two main classes of the phenomena can be distinguished. One contains those cultures in which shamanism, as the autochthonos phenomena, has survived more or less continuously up to the present, while the other group of phenomena consists of neo-shamanism or urban shamanism, which has risen, rising higher and higher, mainly in an urban context. The first group can be divided into a further two subgroups. The first comprises the cultures where shamanism survived and was kept by tradition, practically without interruption, while the second contains the peoples and forms of shamanism where shamans have been almost eliminated but escaped at the last minute. Perhaps the best point to begin with are the Koreans. Korea, lies at the eastern extremity of the Eurasian continent between China and Japan, and has shaped a wholly autonomous culture. An important feature of this autochthonous culture is shamanism. Scholars hold many different opinions on Korean shamanism, its character and components, but they agree on one thing: shamanism represents the oldest stratum in Korean folk religion. All aspects of Korean culture, including religion, are imbued with the ideology of Buddhism and Neo-Confucianism, and nevertheless a stratum presumably originating from Central Asia can't be found underlying these the institution of the king shaman, which can be traced back to the Silla kingdom, 8th century in general, right up to the present, beside the various Christian missionary activities and the new religion movements such as the world religion founded by revered Moon. The strongest trend is the everyday religious practice performed by shamanesses, mundane, which Korean colleagues classified in the category of shamanism. Whatever the case, it is a fact that today's ornamented and highly elaborate shaman ceremony somewhat resembling a dramatic theater performance what determines the everyday religious life of the Koreans, people producing and exploring the most advanced technology at the end of the 20th century. The author personally visited Seoul 3 times and had a number of opportunities to take part in the ceremonies, which were directed by the shamanesses. These ceremonies, lasting several hours, not only convinced me of their very powerful stress-relieving effect spent in religion, I said, but also that they ensure cultural continuity from one generation to the next within culture. The shaman ceremony has become as an important vehicle for the transfer of tradition, since it serves to maintain a direct relationship and communication with the ancestors. The ceremony, known as a Chinagawikot, which serves to evoke the spirit of deceased ancestors, represent a religion forever. In particular, has such a function. The author participated in such a full-day ceremony in Incheon, a suburb of Seoul, in 1994. Although many different cultural developments are found in the Korean shaman ceremonies, in addition to those already mentioned, elements of contemporary life have also been incorporated in religion. Their principal characteristics is nevertheless cultural community, since the operation of the mundane in South Korea has been exposed to any violent influence. Naturally, the situation is different in the north, where the communist ideological hegemony did not tolerate systems of religious beliefs of any kind. In the South, in contrast, shamanism is seen as a traditionalizing expression of national culture and its most outstanding representatives are valued as a national treasure and used for the strengthening of national identity. It is interesting to observe that something similar happened in the field of cultural continuity in Manchuria, one of the religions of the People's Republic of China, inhabited by different nationalities. The Manchu nationality is one of the larger minorities in today's China, 4.5 million, spitting religion, and has an especially strong historical awareness of a spitting others' lyrics and hardness, because they gave the emperor of the last imperial dynasty. In addition, they live in a compact group in Jilin province, and shamanism has very ancient traditions among their religious notions. It takes a special form of clan shamanism, and one of its most important functions is to maintain ethnicity, family and kinship relations on the occasion of large family gatherings. Recent ethnographic documentary film made in the early 90s showed that this is a living tradition. A number of shamans appeared simultaneously at larger gatherings, and a series of ceremonies were held in conjunction with clan prosperity. The fact that for centuries the Manchu shamans had handwritten ceremonial books of all Paze, 1992 straight, 1992, almost certainly contributed to the continuous preservation of the Manchu shaman traditions. In 1993, I personally visited. I spent in Hoppo in China. Manchu shamanism survived the period of communist ideological repression relatively well, and in recent years it has been possible to publish a growing number of books and studies. Also reported that this rebellion has a number of followers and active practitioners among the younger generation too. On the other side of the Amur River in the far eastern part of the Russian Empire lived the small Tungus, people from whose language the word shaman is also derived. In 1993, I spent time among the Nanai people and found that from the point of view of topology of shamanism, there can be regarded as essentially continuous. The elder shamanist, who is illiterate, but nevertheless, precisely for that reason, preserves a rich store of shaman narrative lore, is definitely a fact of the continuity of tradition and the remote corner of the empire. In the small village beside the Amur, the local population need the help of the shamans, which is why they were not persecuted excessively during the period of communism. This example does not mean that shamans were not persecuted more strongly elsewhere. In the case of the Yakuts, for example, the matter of shamanism was treated as a political issue right from the earliest Soviet times, practically up to the present. Balzer, 1993, spitting a religion for eternity, infinity. This is nothing surprising about this, since the shamans were the ones who preserved their traditions. The old beliefs, or world epic tradition and mythology. By practicing their art almost daily, they ensure the continuous existence of folk culture, and therefore it is not by chance that from the 30s the local institutions of repression began to persecute them. Many hundreds of shamans ended their lives in concentration camps or forced labor camps, gulags. In spite of that, they were not entirely wiped out, and when in the early 90s the restrictions of ideological repression began to ease, they immediately surfaced. While earlier they had only been to folklore festivals, in the last few years they had begun to work again, engaged mainly in healing. In 1992, when about the Shaka Republic, I found that the previously persecuted Yakut shamans, Yudagan, and religion had appeared again and were active as healers. They even had a theater performance in the local National Theater for the participants in the International Conference of Shamanism. in which art is played of a part of the shamans in an attempt to preserve the community of the ethnic poetic tradition. Spitting shamanism, a story. I'm speaking a never-ending story of the Siberian shamanism. I'm speaking a never-ending. I'm forever speaking a story of Siberian shamanism, religion,